Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Townsend. I'm the director of the Office of Ethnic Minority Affairs here at American Psychological Association. And I wanted to welcome everyone to our Latino Heritage Month celebration. We're very excited to see everyone here, including our presenters today. Just a little bit more about the Ethnicity and Health in America series. This is one of 4 presentations that we give in honor of the Heritage Months for each of the 4 ethnic groups that we address in our office. So in February, we focus on African Americans. In May, we focus on Asian Americans and Latino Americans, obviously September, October. And then again in November, we'll focus on American Indian, Alaska Natives. This year, we've been looking at substance abuse among the 4 ethnic groups. And we're very excited that we have 2 presenters that are experts in the field of substance abuse among Latino populations. So I'm going to first introduce our first presenter. Dr. Carlota Ocampo is an interim provost at Trinity Washington University, where she oversees academic affairs, assessment, and planning. She is also a tenured associate professor of psychology. She received her PhD in neuropsychology from Howard University in 1997. Her teaching and research interests encompass the interactions among diversity, psychology of oppression, and health. Her most recent educational presentations and publications explore pedagogical reform with the changing student population. Her psychological publications focus on racist incident-based trauma and on ethnicity, gender, and disease. She is a member of the APA Leadership Institute for Women in Psychology, class of 2011. She enjoys ensuring student success, working in higher education administration, and researching and practicing culturally relevant health behaviors. We're very excited to have Dr. Ocampo here with us today. And I just wanted to say, it's so interesting what a small world this is. I just met Dr. Ocampo in person a couple of weeks back when I was at Trinity, and found out we have a friend in common. So I'm excited, doubly excited to have her here, because she's kind of a friend, which makes her my friend. So thank you very much. And I will hand over the mic to Dr. Ocampo, and then I will introduce our next guest following her presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Townsend, and I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you today about salud. That means health. It's a greeting and a toast and all kinds of things, and it's one of my favorite words. Particularly, we're going to be talking about substance abuse and here I struggled, Latino, Latina, Hispanic populations in the U.S. Now, why did I struggle? Because Latino, Latina, Hispanic, I think that my co-presenter, Dr. Fuentes, is going to talk more about this, but what I want to say is it is really a struggle to come up with a framework to describe a so-called Latino population in the U.S. or a Hispanic population in the U.S. These are terms that really don't mean anything. They're socially constructed here in the U.S. The U.S., as you know, has a strong, long history of socially constructing racial and ethnic categorization, and somehow everybody has to fit into that. But the term really, while it may have usefulness at some policy levels, probably doesn't have much cultural relevance for most Latinos on the ground in the United States of America. And so Dr. Fuentes is going to address that more, but it's going to inform a lot of what we talk about today. Okay, let's start with prevalence. So how many Latinos, I mean, why should we be looking at Latinos as a group? Why, do we care? Latinos are actually becoming a more prevalent part of the U.S. population. So this is 2010 U.S. Census population data, but these are the 2013 projections. So they're a little, going ahead of 2010. About a little over 3 million people in the U.S. Right now, 17% claim a Latino heritage. And then you can see in DC about 10%, Maryland about 9%, and Virginia about 9%. So this is a significant portion of the population. And one of the statistics I read states that by 2045, half of Americans will have some Latino heritage. I was quite interested to see that information as, of course, as we, integrate more into the U.S. population. And I'm sure that that's going to change fast. I'm sure that everyone, in an even more forward direction, everyone's been following the plight of the Central American immigrant children trying to cross the border and so on. So there's really, a lot of attention to immigration. Now, you'll see that I tried to break down what Latino means in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area where so many of us practice and live. The top 3 origins for Latinos in this area are Salvadoran, Mexican, and Guatemalan. And by the way, if I can just show this, let me put on my glasses. If I can show this link to you, there's the Pew Charitable Trust think tank does an awesome kind of, can I show this? Well, it won't work. Okay. Well, if you can look at this slide and visit this link here, pewhispanic.org. What it does, it's an interactive map, and you can hover your mouse over different cities, and you will see the breakdown of Latino populations in that city. And why it's important is that what I said before, Latinos isn't one thing. People coming from different parts of Latin America speak different forms of Spanish, have different cultural traditions, different historical traditions, and individual countries. People can come from different ethnic backgrounds and different language traditions and so on. So it's really important to understand that when we talk about Latinos, we're talking about, a category that really you have to drill down into to understand individual human person that's sitting in front of you saying, yeah, I have Latino heritage. All right. I guess that's everything I have to say about that. Up a little bit, down a little bit. Turn it on and off. How's that? Great. All right. Should we be looking at substance use disorders in Latino communities? Well, you've probably heard, because the common knowledge out there in psychology is that Latinos overall have a lower rate of substance abuse than the general population. Most of the data suggests that they have a lower rate, for example, than European Americans and so on. However, that doesn't mean that substance abuse shouldn't be taken very seriously within the communities that it affects. So we don't want to, I come from what, we used to call at Howard a race homogeneous framework. We should look at ethnicities not in comparison to others and say, oh, well, Latinos are great because their rate isn't as high as whites or whatever. Really, we should just look at the community itself and ask, is substance abuse disorder an issue within the community, and how can we address it? And we'll see that one of the risk factors for substance abuse among Latinos in the U.S. is living in the U.S. and being born in the U.S. So it's especially relevant for, and I'm sure Dr. Fuentes will talk more about that, but especially relevant for acculturated U.S. born Latinos. This is a growing issue. So here's some prevalence rates. Again, this is a national survey, the National Epidemiologic Survey on Alcohol and Related Conditions, which these data come from 2005, but, although they're 10 years old, they're pretty recent, but we can maybe assume that these have risen a bit. No substance use disorder, about 70%, alcohol only 20%, and then alcohol or drug use, 10%. So that's 30%. With alcohol alone or alcohol drug issues, that's not insignificant. And Latinos, Hispanics, by the way, are reported to be the fastest growing group entering substance abuse programs in the U.S., according to some data. And a lot of studies have shown that Latinos and Hispanics may be less likely than non-Hispanic whites or Black clients to access and to complete treatment. So even if they access treatment, they very often do not complete treatment, particularly residential programs, but other kinds of programs as well. So all of these kind of broad data indicate that, yes, it's a problem. We should be taking this problem seriously, and we should be finding ways to provide particularly access. And I want to emphasize culturally relevant access for Latinos, Hispanics to get treatment services, get diagnostic and treatment services. Okay, there was something else I wanted to say, but it's putting in my mind right now, but maybe I'll come back. Okay, next slide. Okay, some of the risk factors for substance abuse among Latinos in the U.S. And I'm just going to start using the term Latinos. What I wanted to say, I did want to say something about the previous slide. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. When we say Latinos, Hispanics are the fastest growing group, what I want to impress upon you, and Dr. Fuentes will probably talk about this again, is that rates of substance abuse differ among Latino subgroups. So while, overall, Latinos, broadly defined, may have lower rates than, the general population, when you look at specific subgroups and specific drugs, you will find differing rates and regional areas. So, for example, if you take out Puerto Ricans and opiate abuse in the northeastern corridor, you're going to find significant rates of drug use. And then if you go into the Southwest and you look at, Mexican Americans or people of Central American origin, you're going to find different kinds of rates and in different drugs. So you really have to be very aware, again, that we're talking about Latinos, we're talking about regions, we're talking about different kinds of drugs, we're talking about different subgroups, and so on and so forth. A lot of data, for example, have suggests that even in New York, Cuban Americans have lower rates of, certain kinds of abuse than people of other Latin ethnicities, or I'll say countries of origin. And a lot of researchers have tried to look at some protective factors, why that might be. So just keep in mind, we're talking about a very diverse population and some very diverse issues. Okay, risk factors. So when we talk about experiences of discrimination, so there was a hypothesis that I do not personally ascribe to, that a risk factor for substance abuse, particularly alcohol abuse among Latinos, is being male. So more than in the general population, Latino males have higher rates, particularly of alcohol abuse, than Latino females or women. Sorry, I want to use the word women. So there was a hypothesis that because of machismo, the Latin culture, Latin cultures, one of the identified factors in Latin cultures that some people have researched is the machista culture, machismo, which I'm not denying. Okay, there is Latin culture. Yes, 5 minutes. Oh no. Oh gosh. Okay, Latin cultures. I'm going to rush through this. So Latin cultures do have this machismo dynamic, but studies have looked at the correlation between machismo and substance abuse, and they don't find it. What they find is a strong correlation, particularly for men with experiences of discrimination. So discrimination is a more prevalent factor, a more explanatory factor, according to the research, than cultural factors. That means that something external, something exogenous that's happening to these men is driving them to use drugs, rather than something internal that's cultural. That's important. It's important to me to say that. Exposure to traumatic events increases risk for both Latinos and Latinas. Okay. So again, more than in the general population. So a lot of research in the general population suggests that traumatic experiences for women is a correlate of substance abuse. In particular, for Latinos, it's traumatic events for both men and women. So we're seeing a common theme here: discrimination, traumatic events. U.S. nativity increases the probability of substance use by a huge, margin. For U.S. versus foreign-born people of Latino origin. And also factors in acculturation or correlates with substance abuse among Latinos, such as English language preference and association with non-Hispanics. And there's factors you can take a look at. Almost all of them correlate with substance use among Latinos and substance use disorders among Latino populations. Very quickly, gender differences, I mentioned that before, higher prevalence among men. Wanted to point out again that Latinos are heterogeneous. Substance abuse patterns and risks vary by country of origin, and among Latinos and Latinas, both, again, mood and anxiety disorders are highly comorbid with substance use disorders. So all of these factors are important to keep in mind when working with Latinos, Latinos, Hispanics. finally, protective factors. Well, factors, and there I've got a beautiful, healthy Latino family to demonstrate again, another component of many Latino cultures is familismo. It's called familismo. That means family values in the best sense of the word. Okay, real on and off again. Are we back on? Okay. Family values in the best sense of the word, a real bonding among families, and those family ties are a protective factor for substance use. So endogenous, being female is protective, having an older age, so younger Latinos are more at risk than older Latinos. Having foreign birth is a protective factor, and having a good mental health status overall is a protective factor. Exogenous, cultural beliefs and practices, and spiritual religious beliefs and practices. So an example of this would be juramentos, which have been looked at in Mexico as well as in the, I know they've done some research in Florida among Mexican immigrants on the use of juramentos in the United States. This is not a replacement for treatment, but it's where when a person wants to abstain from drug or alcohol use, they can go before usually a Virgin Mary figure and make a vow to the Virgin that he or she will abstain from use for a specific period. And what's important about juramentos is that it's a spiritual or religious practice that, again, helps people to access treatment services and stay in treatment. So what we were talking about before, how many Latinos don't access services. And if you think about it, many of the services that are provided in the United States are very culturally based. So if you look at like 12-step groups or self-help, groups and things like that, or psychotherapy, a lot of these programs are culturally based within U.S. culture. We just don't look at it that way. But, for Latinos, there are things about that model that may not match with their culture. And so, because it's in that model, sometimes you have to leave family behind and go into treatment, and you can't have relationships with anybody for however long a period of time. And, these kind of expectations are very challenging for Latinos who have this value of familismo. So we need to find other ways. I know I'm going a little over time. I'll finish quickly, but we need to find, ways that are really culturally relevant to draw people in. So I'm not saying that juramentos is going to cure you. So you go before the Virgin and miraculously clear. I mean, that would be wonderful, salud. But really juramentos and practices like that, folk practices like that, or spiritual practices like that are embedded in the Latino way of life. And I'm going to mention, I told Milton I was going to say, Dr. Fuentes, I was going to say a little bit. In my own family, I've seen juramentos used. My great aunt, when my uncle, and this was a family member, when my uncle had a liver disease, she went and did this vow, and she carried out faithfully what she vowed to do in front of the Virgin, and went to all these masses every day and different things, and he survived. And she kept that up throughout her entire life. And the research on juramento suggests that it's not only the person himself who has to do it, but even when family members do it, it influences the outcome. Because again, of this familismo, this family ties, I've seen it with my own eyes. So I offer that little anecdote. Family ties, married state is a protective factor. Employment and income, being employed, protective factor, and also attitudes about health and perceived risk of substance abuse is a protective factor for Latinos. So when they have attitudes that substance abuse is going to be a risk to their health, they abstain. And I'll also mention, again, going back to the familismo, alienation. I haven't seen research on it, but I can say from my own experience, and I have a friend who works in emergency medicine in New York, and, they work with undocumented very alienated and have severe substance abuse issues. So just again, anecdotally, the idea of being connected to one's culture is an important protective factor. And the last thing I'll show is my my reference slides, and of course these slides will be available to you, but there really is a wealth of very good research that's been done within the last 10 years. Unfortunately, the research is growing, but as you can well imagine, we definitely need more. So I am going to hand the mic back to Dr. Townsend.
Thank you very much. It feels a little odd to me to not at least give her a hand for the presentation in between. know we're pressed for time, and we certainly do want to get to Dr. Fuentes' presentation, but I did want to acknowledge and thank you for your presentation and for, sharing your knowledge with us. So we'll have time for questions following Dr. Fuentes' presentation. So please, make a note of any questions that you have, and we'll have time to do question and answer. So I want to go to our next presenter. Dr. Milton Fuentes received his master's in psychology with a focus on Latino psychology from Montclair State University, and his PsyD in clinical psychology from the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology at Rutgers University. He completed a predoctoral fellowship in clinical and community psychology at Yale University and a postdoctoral training in epidemiology at Columbia University. He is currently a professor and chair of the clinical PsyD program at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in Washington, D.C., as well as the director of the Clinical and Community Studies Laboratory. He is a founding member and former president of the Latino Psychological Association of New Jersey and the 2012 president of the National Latino Psychological Association. Dr. Fuentes' research interests are in the areas of Latino, Latina, and multicultural psychology, child and family psychology, and pedagogy. He served as a consultant to several programs, including the Puerto Rican So without further ado, Dr.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon to everyone. I think I've got my mic on. Yeah. So it's really unusual for me to do a presentation sitting down. I'm typically up, moving around, and doing all sorts of movements. So just to let you know, there's a number of activities that I'm going to be doing over the course of the next hour that's going to involve you and engage you and get you to think through some of the topics that we'll be discussing. The presentation today, I'm trying to do something that could take weeks in an hour, right? And so in my 20 years of working with Latino families and Latino children, Latino adolescents, I have found certain factors to be salient, certain factors to be critical to my work with them. So those are the things that I'm going to try to highlight this afternoon for you today. So I'd like you to get a piece of paper and grab a pen, or if you don't have one, if you can just share like a piece of paper or a pen with your neighbor. Yeah.
That's showing on this screen.
Yeah, so can we bring up my presentation, please? I'm going to have you do an activity that was introduced to me by Nadia Fouad, who's one of the co-authors of the multicultural guidelines that were published by the American Psych Association. She did this activity with me about 10 years ago, and I'd like to engage you in this activity. It's called a silent interview. So I'd like you to identify a person in the room that you don't know very well. Someone you don't know very well? Everyone have one? And I'd like you to answer these 6 questions about the individual. Just looking across the room, this is a silent interview.
Okay.
Gonna bring it over here.
There we go. Got it.
Alrighty. So I'd like you to answer these 6 questions. Where did this person grow up? What is this person's ethnicity? What type of work does this person's parents do? What does this person do in his or her spare time? How many languages does this person speak? And what kind of music does this person listen to? So try your best to answer these 6 questions about this person that you don't know very well. I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. And it's okay if something just jumps into your head. You can just jot down that note that jumps into your head. And now we're going to use the rice and beans enchiladas to fuel our movement around the room. I'm going to invite you to meet up with this person, share with the person how you answered these questions, and then if you're right, put a little check mark next to that correct answer. If you're incorrect, get the correct answer from that person. You might want to say hi and introduce yourself as well while you're doing that. So go ahead and make your way over, and I'll give you about 3 minutes to do that. Would you like some water?
Yeah.
Just kidding. Loved it. Okay, folks, if I can get you back, please. Okay. All righty. So can I get a volunteer couple to just play with me for a little bit? Was any couple successful at answering all 6 questions correctly? Yeah? Oh, I hear volunteers on my left over here. No? No? Any other individual? You got one? All right. Do you mind if we play a little bit with you too? All right. All right. So why don't we start with you? What's your name?
Neri.
Neri. And who did you interview?
Roberta.
Roberta. All right. So in terms of, where did you have Roberta growing up?
Has to be all the way out.
Where-
In the city. I was very general.
The city being
City.
Washington, D.C. or
No, I just did.
insert the blank. So you had to growing in an urban community.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And we'll stay with the city. Okay. What I want folks to listen to is listen very carefully to the answers that people chose to these 6 questions and see if you can kind of help me understand and deconstruct why we may have used these answers with these individuals. Okay, so we had her growing up in the city. And so where did you grow up, Roberta?
California.
Huntington Beach.
Not a huge, oh well, there's,
Okay.
There's
It is a city.
So
it is a big city, but it's not a New York or
yes.
Washington.
All right. So as you hear the answers, see what happens in your head. When you hear the city versus Huntington Beach,
Beach.
California.
Mhm.
Okay. And then what did you say about Roberta's ethnicity?
I wasn't sure, so I put Caucasian, but I had a question mark in terms of I wasn't 100% sure about that.
And what do we know now about her ethnic
She
background?
is half Caucasian and Mexican.
Okay. Thank you. And then what did you have her parents doing?
Well, from my own background, and my parents were teachers, and most people with my parents were teachers, I said a teaching career.
Both of them were.
No, her parents.
We didn't talk about
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Do you want to tell us about that, Roberta?
My mom was a nurse, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you. And then in terms of her spare time, what did you have her doing?
Reading books.
Reading books? Roberta? What can you tell us about your spare time?
I wish I could read books in my spare time. We didn't talk about what I do in my spare time. I have young children, so most of all my spare time is spent with them.
Okay, thank you. Languages spoken, what did you say?
I said just one, but she is bilingual. But I
Okay.
didn't get to what the second language.
Spanish.
Spanish.
Great. And then what kind of music did you have her listening to?
Stuck with the rhythm and upbeat music, and
Uh-huh.
she listens to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you do with your partner?
So I thought I was being general by saying she's from the Northeast U.S.
Okay.
But I wasn't quite as general as she is, and that was correct. Right?
Maryland. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I put African American as her ethnicity, which is
Correct.
But also,
In the literal
I don't know if
In the literal sense, I'm Nigerian.
Nigerian.
Mhm.
Okay.
for some reason I put that her parents were lawyers. That's the only thing that popped into my brain.
Uh-huh.
They are not. So my mother's a nurse and my father's a pharmacist. But I have a brother that went to law school. So
She's picking up on that
This is
vibe.
based on nothing. I don't know.
Okay. What did you have
Um,
her doing in her
I put
spare time?
Books in her spare time.
a long time ago. So I think I sleep in my spare time.
Great, thank you.
You want me to keep
Languages spoken? Yeah.
I put one.
One. But I blame my parents that I don't know more.
Okay.
They speak more than one.
Okay.
And for music,
I put I have no idea.
I listen to everything with few exceptions.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so if we had time, imagine this being, usually when I do this activity across the country, usually there's hundreds of people in the room and you really get to hear from at least 10 of them and you start to hear patterns in what people are saying, what people are communicating. So just imagine, I want you to play with me a little bit around that. So first of all, what was this activity like for you as I asked you to do this activity? Yes, please. What came up for you as yeah.
I found it to be like slightly uncomfortable because when I read a question and thought about the person, an idea immediately popped into my head, but I also knew it was a stereotypical idea. But I had to be honest about that and just go with it.
Right. Okay. So there was some discomfort around it, but you tolerated the discomfort and put that out there to make sense of what was going on in your head. Okay. Other folks, what was that? What was it like for you?
We're already colleagues, and it's actually relaxing and a nice opportunity.
Okay. So you saw it as an opportunity to get to know a little bit better. Okay. Other folks? Yeah, back there.
I saw it as okay. So I saw it as it was weird because I don't know this person for anything, and I'm just judging them on what I'm seeing right here and with the parents, and then it just made me think about the stereotypes that people have, and then the prejudices that people have about other people, and how
Right.
they might make assumptions about who they are and what they do just by looking at them. And I've been trying to they took me to that place.
Right. Right. Okay. Thank you. Any other final thoughts?
Usually, I don't want to go to that place of immediate judgment, but it's an activity based on pretty much stereotyping and someone for what they look on the outside, making a judgment on that. This is determining what a stereotype is.
Yep.
Or don't want to offend anybody. You also don't want to lie, like you were saying. So you kind of go with your best judgment and hope you're right.
Yep.
Wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, what we do know about what I just asked you to do is something we do every day on a regular basis, every couple minutes, every hour. I asked you to do something that you naturally do, but when we put a spotlight on it, all of a sudden we become a little bit more conscious about what we're doing. And I remember when I did this with Nadia Fouad 10 years ago, she asked, who chose not to do the activity? And you chose not to do it. And can I find out why? You thought it was what?
A lot of people in here I know a little bit about. There's other folks that I don't know anything about. I think it was real that you're looking at.
Okay. All right. And I did the same thing. I chose not to participate because I knew what she was up to. And I thought I was being a smart guy. I know she's trying to get me to do it. I'm not going to do it. And she made a really good point. It was a piece on NPR yesterday. This cognitive psychologist was profiling a book called, I think it was called Everyday Bias. And it was on this very topic. We do this every day on a regular basis. We get hit with information. It gets sent to the amygdala. Amygdala takes this information, sends it to the hippocampus. We use in the hippocampus. We try to figure out, okay, what do I have in my memory that I can connect to this data bit? And then it just crosses through the brain. And then, this person's a lawyer. Oh, her mom's a teacher, right? Because we've got all this data in our heads around how things get organized, how the world gets organized. And this gentleman, and Nadia also said to me, was biases, to unpack our assumptions. How are we going to grow comfortable with them? How are we going to dismantle them? How are we going to be aware of them? Which I found incredibly helpful, because as a nation, we have a tendency not to have this conversation comfortably. We experience all sorts of feelings. Sometimes we'll have a thought that doesn't make us very comfortable, so we have guilt, so we put that thought away. We'd rather not deal with that thought. And what the cognitive psychologist is recommending, what Nadia was recommending, is that we spend some time kind of making sense of that thought, unpacking that thought, understanding how that thought impacts our functioning and the way we relate to others. That said, so when I do this across the country with folks, these are some of the things I find. I find that all mothers are teachers, all fathers are in business. I find that everybody's growing up in a heterosexual household. I find that we go for very safe answers. She grew up in this city, right? Which city I'd rather not say. Because if I say, I might offend, right? I might offend. And there is a norm in this country to be polite. And if we've got nothing nice to say, we shouldn't say it at all, right? And so while that can be perhaps helpful in some instances, in other instances in the clinical arena, it could be problematic, right? If we don't take the time to dismantle and make sense of this. I'd like to share my own story around the assumptions I make. When I come to a training, I assume everybody in the room can see, because I can see. And so there's some kind of self-centeredness around that idea that I can see, everybody else can see. And I remember doing this training a few years ago, and I walked into the room and I said, everybody pick a person, look at that person, answer these 6 questions. And I heard a voice in the back of the room, and the person said, how do you want me to do it? So I looked back, and she's sitting back there with a cane. She was obviously at this point blind. And so I made my way to the back of the room, and I said, how would you normally do this in everyday life? And she said, maybe if I get to hear the person's voice, I can kind of develop some thoughts about the person. So I adapted the activity accordingly. But it made me aware of my own bias. Everybody in the world could see, right, in my mind, which is really not the case. That said, what are some assumptions that we have about Latinos, or that you've heard about Latinos? What are our assumptions about Latinos as we unpack this term Latinos? What do we know about them?
Well, they're in gangs.
They're in gangs.
A lot of gang, behavior. Especially Salvadoran.
Okay, so higher activity in gangs, women stay at home. What else do? Very religious. They have big families.
They like to dance to salsa music.
They love to dance and party.
They're very emotional.
Yep.
Yeah.
You see Latinos on TV, we're almost always dancing or singing. We're the happiest people in the world. or we're, engaging in some sort of criminal activity if we're on TV. Any other assumptions?
They're undocumented.
Undocumented. It's a nice word for saying they're illegal, right? When we talk about them, they're illegal aliens. Any other? What's that?
They're all Mexicans.
They're all Mexicans. I just want to make sure that the viewers outside of here know that this is not something we're promoting or embracing. It's just we're unpacking assumptions that we have about Latinos. I would hate to see a clip of this being put out there with Dr. Fuentes saying these things about Latinos. So just make sure that the general public knows what's going on here. Okay, so let me go to our next slide here. What I want to spend some time with you here is, that's okay. There we go. Is talking about diversity and talking about the term Latino. And I think when I talk about the term diversity and the term Latino, right now I'm going to use them synonymously. Because I think this is what we talk about. So when we talk about Latinos, what is a Latino, right? When we talk about diversity, what is diversity? And I'm reminded of a great story. And so I love telling stories when I present. And I think that might be part of my sociocultural profile. I'm Puerto Rican, and I grew up with lots of stories. Whenever my parents were trying to communicate something to me, there was usually a good saying that would communicate the idea, or there was a great story. And so I have found that I pepper my presentation with stories. And so this story really resonates for me around how we understand Latinos and how we understand the term diversity. So there were these 6 blind men who were traveling, and they came across an elephant. And they were interested in figuring out what an elephant looked like. And so because they couldn't see the elephant, they decided, well, let's touch the elephant, feel the elephant, and see if we can figure out what an elephant looks like. So the one blind person says, the elephant is like a fan. And he's got his hands next to the elephant's ear, and the ear is moving. Second blind man says, I don't know what you're talking about, because the elephant is like a tree. And of course, he's got his arms around the elephant's leg. The third guy shrieks, oh no, the elephant's like a sword, and he pierces his hand on the elephant's tusk. And they go back and forth, the snake and rope, and you get all these different answers to what an elephant is. But you never get to really figure out what the elephant looks like or what an elephant is. And I think that's what we do when we talk about diversity, and that's what we do when we talk about Latinos. And the reality is that these are both complex concepts that need to be understood in a complex way. In psychology, we like things to be parsimonious. When we develop theories have to be parsimonious. They need to be clear and concise and cogent. And when it comes to diversity, when it comes to understand Latinos, it's not that simple. It's not that singular. And so what I want to share with you is my favorite definition of culture, and I want you to think about this definition as it relates to Latinos. And this definition is Celia Falikov's definition, who's done some really good work with Latinos. She's a nationally known family therapist, she's in the 2nd edition of Latino Families in Therapy. I'll show you her book in a little bit. But I like her definition a lot. She asserts that culture is those sets of shared worldviews, meanings, and adaptive behaviors derived from simultaneous membership and participation in a variety of contexts, such as language, rural, urban, or suburban setting, race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, age, gender identity, sexual orientation, and sexual variance, religion, disability, nationality, employment, education, and occupation, political ideology, stage of migration, acculturation, partaking of similar historical moments, and ideologies. Complex. There's much there, much to unpack. I am going to highlight aspects of this definition as it relates to Latinos, and then we can think about it as it pertains to treatment. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the book that I'm referencing. She introduces us to a model for working with Latinos or understanding Latinos, which is the MECA model. I have found it incredibly helpful with other ethnic groups as well. So if you're interested in kind of thinking about this model and using this model with other groups, I think it could easily be adapted. Within this model, so MECA is an acronym that captures three different components to her model. The first one is multidimensional. The second letter, the E, is ecosystemic. The C is comparative, and then the A is for approach. And so we're going to think through those three dimensions as they relate to Latinos. Within the first aspect of it, multidimensional, what she argues is that people's identity exists in multiple contexts. And depending on that context, different aspects of their identity are going to be highlighted, right? So at the Chicago school, I'm Dr. Fuentes. In local DC, I'm Milton. At my sister's house, I'm Uncle Mookie, right? In the South Bronx, where I do some consulting, I'm a psychologist. So depending on which context I'm in, different aspects of my identity are going to be highlighted or going to be salient. And then those different aspects of my identity are going to intersect to inform who I am and to inform my functioning. Okay, so here are some examples really quickly. In walks the client to our consultation room, and we have an Argentine Jew, right? Which aspect of their identity will I focus on? Will I focus on the spiritual, religious aspect of their identity, although some would argue that Jewish ethnic background is an ethnicity as well? Or will I focus on the Argentinian part, the kind of racial, ethnic part? Or will I focus on sex, gender, sexual orientation? U.S. citizen versus illegal. I put the word illegal in quotation marks. I opt for the word undocumented as well, because I think at one point, no one was documented in this country, right? The documents occurred via gunpowder. I have a gun. This is mine now. These are my documents. And then we put in a system for documentation. So I like the word undocumented because I think it really captures what's going on here. We have a client who walks in, a gay Puerto Rican. Which aspect of their identity am I gonna focus on? And then a poor Black Cuban male. We've got 4 different aspects of that identity. Which aspects we're going to focus on in the treatment. The good thing about where we're going in psychology and where we're going in mental health is we're moving from diversity 1.0 to diversity 2.0. We've come to recognize that we can no longer think about these concepts in a singular, static way. We now know that all these aspects of our identity intersect in a dynamic way to inform who we are and to inform how we function. And so this model led to my development of what I call the sociocultural profile, which my colleague Hector Adames and I published in a book that for counseling students. So, just going to ask you to just take 3 minutes to complete your sociocultural profile. What I'd like you to do is to identify your membership in these sociocultural categories: race, ethnicity, class, gender. Feel free to skip anyone you don't want to do, and then think about it from a power-based model. Does your identity in this category give you power, take power away, or give you a mixed form of power? All right, so identify your level of power as it associates to that aspect. And notice down the bottom that there are some empty squares. So if you wanna let us know about other aspects of your identity that you feel are salient, and then contribute to your profile, please feel free to add stuff there. So what I would normally do with this activity is I would normally have you pair and share with somebody in the room and talk about insights or questions or comments that you have about engaging this activity. In the interest of time, I'll I'll forgo that, but I just want to check in with you. Any questions or comments or insights you have about this activity? Yes.
I was confused. I didn't know where to go with race and ethnicity.
Uh-huh.
Because when I saw race, it was on a firefly. I went to ethnicity. I was like, oh no, I didn't know what to say. And I thought maybe that's what my mind went to. I think politically correct and go African American, or are those two one and the same?
Uh-huh.
And I don't know the answer to that question. So and then I get down to gender and sex. Then I said male, and then I wasn't sure if it was like the two different terms to describe the same thing, or if I had to answer both.
Okay.
And then as far as power and status goes with either one of those, I felt it was mixed for both. But I feel like with either one, it could be argued like one side or the other.
Right.
Whether it be fully subordinate or fully dominant or vice versa for being a male and African American.
Right. Thank you. Thoughts or comments to that, or any other insights or comments you might have? Yeah. You weren't sure what to.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the dominant, before the dominant thing was confusing or at least hard to figure out. Yeah. So
Okay. All right. We'll unpack some.
maybe they're fluid,
Yeah.
you know, across the categories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with the same thing in terms of race and ethnicity. My first thought is race, white, ethnicity, white again. I realized at least, like, in my interpretation, like, I am not, let's say I was like Ukrainian or Polish or from somewhere in Europe, I could put that because it's a sort of it's a culture within a race. I mean, it's obviously completely like made up concepts, but
Uh-huh.
that was my interpretation of ethnicity. However, I'm not in one of those groups I just named, so I guess I just put white again.
Uh-huh. Okay.
For me, when I got the status as a dominant, part of me wanted to think of how society sees it versus how I see it, but then it's very different. And I guess for me, I would have put, I guess, I don't like using religion, but I guess my sexuality was dominant for me because I think
Mhm.
it receives all of those.
Mm-hmm.
Of how I am in this world, regardless of what's going on in society. So I think it was just hard to separate my personal thoughts from other people who, for example, may identify with the same ethnicity.
Yep.
And how through their experiences it may be subordinate versus for someone else may be dominant. So
Right.
it's hard for me to separate me from other people like me who may feel otherwise. And
Right.
I can recognize why they would feel
Right.
otherwise.
Right. And what we did do with this activity was we did create a special column for personal and a column for societal, because while you may not feel oppressed personally, you know that the group is oppressed from a societal perspective. And so we did differentiate that. In terms of race and ethnicity, I heard some talks about a lot of these terms being socially constructed terms and not really being based in reality. Did you want to say something? You kept it. What is? Uh-huh. Right. Right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
All none of that I have any power until I get to the ability. Maybe I have some dominant power, and I don't have the ability.
Right. Right. So that's where you have power. Okay. And did anybody add anything under the blank ones, the empty squares? No. No one put any thoughts about what people might put in those empty squares? Other parts of your identity that might give you power or privilege or take education level?
Travel and amount of contact with other people
Uh-huh.
in other parts of the world.
Yep. Would inform that. Marital status. Right?
Country of origin.
Yes. Yes.
Can we see your political
Political orientation. Interesting. And then some people have added language. In some instances, language will give you power and privilege. If you have an accent, depending on the accent, you could gain power and privilege or lose power and privilege. Interesting research around accents. So Spanish sounding accents, people are typically perceived as incompetent or not knowing as much. But an accent from like England, for example, or South Africa, people have different perceptions around that. So I want to just do mine really quickly, just to unpack some of these terms. So, I was aware of some of this stuff as a child, but I couldn't give it names. I just knew that depending on where I was, people focused on different aspects of my identity and highlighted different aspects of my identity. So I grew up in Kearney, New Jersey, which was a primarily Scottish-Irish community. And we were probably the first Puerto Rican family in Kearney, New Jersey. And they would refer to me as a spick. And I eventually learned that they were focusing on my ethnicity, that has something to do with my ethnicity. And it wasn't a very good thing. It wasn't like something that they wanted to celebrate with me. It was a part of my identity that they wanted to highlight and then make me feel bad about, right? Same 10-year-old making his way to Puerto Rico, right, to visit my grandfather every year. And there, I wasn't a spick, but I was el americano. I was the American. And they were very afraid of me, because they thought that I was aggressive and impulsive. I don't know why they would have that impression of me, but as an American, those are their associations to me, aggressive and impulsive. And so they were very respectful out of fear. And then in Kearney, I would make my way across the bridge to Newark, New Jersey to visit my cousins, and they would call me a white boy. Right? I was no longer a spick. I was no longer el americano. I was now a white boy. And there was something about the way I was, I'm not sure if it was my skin tone or the way I comport myself, but there was something about that suggested whiteness to them, right? Same 10-year-old, different context, different aspects of my identity being revealed. All that to just illustrate, having done the sociocultural factors in research and across the country with different people, identity is multidimensional, and it's made up of several sociocultural factors. It's dynamic and fluid, and these factors will interact to enhance, compromise, or neutralize each other. Identity is defined by context. Identity is associated to power and privilege. And what we have found is that sociocultural profile allows us to have this conversation in a very kind of comfortable and safe way. Having done it with folks across the country, and having done it with patients and students, people feel pretty comfortable doing it this way for some reason, unpacking their identity through the sociocultural profile, which is exciting. That said, the second part of Falikoff's model is the ecosystemic model, ecosystemic component. People walk in with their identity to different aspects of society, schools, political arenas, communities, DIFAS, social clubs, DIFAS being the Child Protective Bureau, courts. Depending on what aspect of their identity walks into that room and is highlighted, they will have very different experiences. They will have different access to resources, entitlement, powerlessness. I was just having breakfast this morning with two colleagues, and we were talking about how children who come from other countries, who make their way into school systems, tend to be placed in classes beneath them, without formal testing or without any kind of clear, explicit explanation of what is going on here. And I was talking to somebody from Trinidad, somebody from Jamaica, and I was from Puerto Rico, and we were talking about this and the things that people did to ensure that we were not placed beneath our actual level, and who was involved in that. So people walk into systems and they either have access to resources or entitlements, or lose access to these resource entitlements depending on which aspect of the system they're in and which aspect of their identity is being highlighted. And the last piece of her model is the comparative. Thank you. Is the comparative piece. And that is thinking through how to compare the subgroups so that we could see the differences. So when we talk about Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Salvadorians and Guatemalans, thinking through what is similar about them and what is different so that we can fully understand the differences that exist between them. So for example, if we look at Mexicans versus Puerto Ricans versus Cubans, all have had very different migration stories, very different migration patterns, very different welcome experiences in the US. Their political status is very different. A Cuban makes his way into the US, touches US land, and automatically becomes a US citizen. Where a Puerto Rican is just born and automatically becomes a US citizen, whereas a Mexican, you've read the stories, you've seen the movies, what they have to go through to make their way to this country to try to secure citizenship. And then just the host perception. So, you know, all this illustrates a number of things when it comes to Latinos. Who exactly are we talking about? What exactly are we talking about? What aspect of their identity are we talking about? And then the last thing that Palikhov's model does, which is really nice, is it gets us to think about the patient's perspective versus the therapist's perspective versus the supervisor's perspective. So I was just supervising, I oversee a mental health team in the South Bronx. And I have a student from Argentina who speaks Spanish with an Argentinian accent. And if you have an Argentinian and a Puerto Rican speaking Spanish, you'll hear a huge difference in the way we speak Spanish. And so she was trying to decide whether she should play down the Argentinian accent, play up the Argentinian accent in her work with clients. And as the supervisor, I have a lot of influence there. I will inform the treatment process. I will inform how this person gets diagnosed. I will inform how this person gets treated. I will inform whether she hides her accent, neutralizes her accent. And so we had a long conversation about that. You know, I'm not sure what a supervisor who's not aware of these dynamics would do with this conversation with a supervisee. But yet across this country, there are lots of folks supervising therapists who are working with Latino patients who are not having these conversations, these very important conversations. At the end of the day, I said you have to be you. So whatever accent is most congruent with who you are, let that accent come out and then talk that through with the patient. I don't know if we're gonna have time to do this today, but there's a great article that Martin LaRoche and April Maxey published in the Professional Psychology Research and Practice on talking about these topics with patients and how to think them through. What I was hoping to do today was how to think through these 10 considerations with Latinos. We may get there, we may not get there. There may be another presentation, so we'll see. I'm gonna, so with all that said, if we know there are 20 plus Latino subgroups out there, and within that, there are lots of differences, how do we really grow to appreciate a group that we're gonna work with? If we're gonna wind up working with Guatemalans, for example, how do we get to really figure out how to work with Guatemalans? And the field has done some interesting things in this area. When I was in grad school 20 years ago, it was the patient's job to teach me about Guatemalan culture, right? Maybe about 10 years later, the pendulum swung and experts felt like, no, it's not the patient's job, it's your job to figure out about Guatemalan culture. You need to do all the background research, learn about Guatemalan culture. And I really believe that the answer now is in the middle, and that's corroborated by a number of other cultural experts. Because even with Guatemalan culture, as Dr. Ocampo pointed out, there are 23 different languages spoken in Guatemala and very different subgroups in Guatemala. So I can do my best to learn about Guatemalan culture, but I don't know which part of Guatemalan culture this person identifies with and how that informs his or her functioning. And so spending some time doing that. I recommend this resource. It's a quick and easy way to kind of figure out Guatemalan culture, Salvadoran culture, Colombian culture. It's a good start. I'm not saying it's the beginning and the end, but it's a good start if you want to get history on Colombian, on the country of Colombia, languages, rituals, norms, that kind of stuff. It's a good start to doing this work. I want to quickly go to, this is a great book that I just want to highlight, Addressing Cultural Complexes in Practice, which has some really good things that we can do with our work with Latinos. Pamela Hayes has a second edition of this, but I want to talk about acculturation because it's so important for our work with Latinos. We know that according to the Department of Homeland Security, a little over 1 million people migrate into this country every year. And when they arrive, they're faced with, how am I doing with time? We're good? A little over 1 million people migrate into this country every year, and they're faced with a major decision. Which aspect of my culture of origin do I hold on to? Which aspect of my culture of origin do I need to let go of when I'm here in the US? Which aspect of the host culture should I take in? And which aspect of the host culture should I stay away from? You know, and culture has gotten lots of attention over the past 15, 20 years. And I feel like the field, to some extent, has used culture as an excuse for behavior. And I'm here to say that there are some aspects of culture that can be problematic. There are some aspects that are informed by culture that can be problematic. And I don't think we talk a lot about that. And I think we need to unpack that, have that conversation, unpack that conversation. There are some aspects of culture that are incredibly wonderful and lead to protecting the identity of the person and lead to resiliency and wellness and growth. But there are aspects of culture that can be toxic, and really spending some time dismantling that is critical in our work with Latinos. Our work in the area of acculturation has developed considerably. When we first started to think about acculturation, people came to the US, they shedded their old identity, they took on US American identity, and that's it, it's over. We've understood acculturation. Fortunately, Barry came along in the 80s and said, no, it's a bit more complex than that. We know that there's people have to think through, what do they want to hold on to, what do they want to let go of, what parts of the new culture they want to take on, what parts they want to stay away from. And then recently, a great article was published by Schwartz and his colleagues on a new model for understanding acculturation. Let me unpack that for you in a second. Just go to the next slide. Actually, I'm going to go to this slide here. Okay. So I mentioned people may do one of four things, right? They arrive to this country, they assimilate. They arrive to this country, they separate. They kind of hold on to their cultural origin, connect with people who are like them, and separate from the culture of origin. Some folks integrate, become bicultural, and some folks marginalize. The research around marginalization is suggesting that it's not as common, but there are folks who make their way to a part of this country where they're not allowed to maintain their cultural identity. There aren't lots of opportunities to practice their culture, to speak their language, to find foods and customs and connections that are from their cultural origin. And then the host culture isn't very receptive to them. So there's no opportunity to really take on the host culture, so they become marginalized. Again, the research suggests that those folks are more rare, but there's interesting research around assimilation, separation, integration. Of those four, the one that's associated with the most positive psychological and physical outcomes is cultural integration or biculturalism. Okay, let me talk to you about this really quickly, the immigration paradox. And that is what Dr. Ocampo was mentioning earlier. As folks remain in this country, the longer they remain in this country, the worse off they are. All right, so when we look at some research there, Hispanic adolescents who speak mostly Spanish, associate primarily with Spanish speakers, and engage in Hispanic cultural practices are less likely to use drugs and alcohol, are more likely to be physically active, are less likely to consume fast food, are more likely to adhere to prescribed health regimens, especially when it comes to diabetes, than their more acculturated peers. And these folks end with the message more or less is that acculturation may be hazardous to one's health. Okay? So something to be mindful of. You know, and we're faced with this. I'm faced with this on a regular basis with the patients that I work with. When parents come in and say, you know, should I speak Spanish to my children? Should they learn English at school and Spanish at home? Should they learn our practices? You know, parents really struggle because most Latino families that I work with, these parents are heavily committed to the wellness and growth of their children in an admirable way. It never gets profiled or showcased in the way I see it in the office, but I have yet to meet, in my 20 years of working with Latino families, I've yet to meet a parent say, I really want to mess my kids up as much as possible. I've never heard them say that. They always have the most amazing dreams for their kids, the most amazing goals for their kids. And so when parents come to me and ask, how should I manage these dynamics? It's a conversation that I need to have with them, and a conversation that folks will need to have. With respect to biculturalism, as I mentioned, it's the one that's associated with most favorable psychological outcomes, higher self-esteem, lower levels of depression, these pro-social behaviors, the ability to come in and out of context comfortably. I can do that comfortably. I speak Spanish and English comfortably, so I can kind of do that comfortably. So this idea of cultural role switching is wonderful. The third model, which is the current model, is the multidimensionality model. It's our new way of understanding acculturation. 4 minutes? Okay. It's our new way of understanding acculturation. So there's the typical stuff, the cultural stuff, the things we can see, the behavioral stuff. There's the values that the person embraces and holds on to. And then the third thing is, I may be Puerto Rican, but do I identify as a Puerto Rican, and do I get esteem from my connection with Puerto Rican culture? So the newer research around acculturation is looking at these three components. They're all critical to the acculturation process. So I want to wrap up a couple things. Let me just show you one more thing. Things that will mediate the acculturation process. The age that the person arrives, right? Person who's younger may have a very different experience in this country, may be kind of more flexible and take on the host culture in a more flexible way versus somebody who comes a little bit older. When you arrive, what do you look like, right? If you don't look like U.S. American core, whatever that looks like, right? You're going to have a different experience in this country than if you can blend, if you can pass, so on and so forth. And then where you arrive to, these ethnic enclaves, where you arrive to. If you arrive to a place where folks speak your language, eat your food, appreciate your values, so on and so forth, that will allow you to maintain your culture versus those folks who don't arrive to those places. My new research is looking at skin tone. Latinos come in all different colors, and they will have very different experiences depending on their skin tone. This is something we don't talk about as much in our research. When we do research, check the box, right? This is my race, fill in the blank. This is my ethnicity. When you crunch those numbers, you don't get this. You don't get this skin tone. You don't get how it's being expressed phenotypically. And what I'm trying to persuade researchers to do is to capture this too. And there are some quick and easy ways to capture skin tone. Because folks, light-skinned Puerto Ricans have a very different experience in this country, as I have, than dark-skinned Puerto Ricans. And I know that it's a phenomenon that's alive and well in the African-American community. There's a great piece in NPR around that. And so, to end with, Latinos are multidimensional. We need to be mindful of all these sociocultural variables, factors. The acculturation process is important. We need to be mindful of the acculturation process. Where they fall in terms of their identity, in terms of their ethnic identity, is important to tease out in the room. Their skin tone. And I was going to unpack a few more things, but we've run out of time. So thank you for your time and attention. Yes.
Okay, I wanted to thank Dr. Fuentes and again thank Dr. Ocampo for your presentations and for sharing your knowledge and information with us. This has been a very enlightening session, and I wanted to open it up for questions. So if there are questions here in the Zoom or if there are questions that are online, this is the time for us to address those questions.
Thank you. Oh, well, thank you for your presentation. I had a question in regards to looking at identity. So in terms of trying to capture that, for example, through a questionnaire, what would you recommend a particular scale out in the literature that best tries to attempt to capture identity? Is there a particular scale that you would recommend for research?
I recommend that you develop one, or that's, I'm doing some research now. Thank you. That's such an excellent question. I'm sorry? Oh, the question was, given the multidimensional identity of the, diverse Latino population, how do we capture that if we're doing a survey, for example, how will we capture that in a scale? And, the Bureau of the Census workers who construct, these census surveys have really struggled with this. And I've struggled with it. I'm working on a project right now with a colleague looking at, Latino experiences in the healthcare system. And we, had this regular, kind of scale stuck in there that people use, black, white, Hispanic, Latino, whatever. And I just said, well, this is completely irrelevant. And when you're going into community centers and asking people to fill this out, they're not going to know what to check. They don't know what, they're like, what am I? I have no idea. It really doesn't. So what I was saying before is the United States has this very structured, system for categorizing people that's based on phenotypical characteristics largely. And you're trying to take this huge diversity of humanity and stuff it into these boxes, and it's very challenging. So I would recommend that someone come up with a good scale for doing this.
I completely agree. In the meantime, we do need to capture this phenomenon somehow. And we know that the model, does include behavioral components of acculturation. So you could use the standard acculturation, the short brief acculturation scale to capture those behavioral things. But then you would want to add, so I would argue for a mixed method research design. So you'd do kind of the traditional survey inventory kind of component. And then you want to add some open-ended questions to capture the value systems that inform this person's identity and their functioning. And they're thinking about their identification with this particular category. So, when you think about being Puerto Rican, what comes to mind for you? Do you get self-esteem or esteem from that? Do you get pleasure from that association, or is it a mixed experience? But you see, I think some open questions to capture that, some of that stuff would be important until we catch up and have a good model for capturing it. Thanks for the question.
Can I would like to make another question about, for those who are interested in doing research and particularly collecting survey data, a huge issue with doing this type of research, well, any type of research with Latinos in the United States, is the issue of persons living without documentation, or people without papers, PWP, people without papers. We can't capture them. It's very challenging to capture them. And our sample is always going to be biased because, people without papers are not going to report on a piece of paper and, about themselves. It's very challenging. And so that's like a population that we really don't know about. And can we generalize from documented people to people who are living in the United States without papers? We don't know. So that's another just research challenge I'll point out.
Other questions, comments? Observations?
I had one. I always wondered what it's like in the therapeutic setting, being like a black man and be fairly young. Is there, I guess, from your experience, you've been doing it for about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you, as a person who's not within that culture or within any culture that you're addressing, like blatantly in the therapeutic setting, what would you recommend, like, as a technique to go about doing so without being like uber offensive or aggressively demonstrating that you're trying to be extra, like, attentive to whatever
right.
what you're doing?
So to repeat the question, so how are we mindful of these dynamics in the therapy room, the consultation room? So I really want to recommend, if this is of interest to you, I really want to recommend that article by Martin Laroche and April Maxey, 10 Cultural Considerations in Cultural Practice. I think it's important to bring this stuff up, whether it's relevant or not. I think it's important to bring it up. And to ask folks, to complete the sociocultural profile, to have that conversation with them, to talk about ways that we're similar, and to talk about ways that we're different. Because as a light-skinned, doctoral level Puerto Rican, I have a very different experience than other Puerto Ricans in this country or other Latinos in this country. And so to talk about how are we similar and how are we different should be happening very early on, and should also continue to happen throughout the clinical process. Some people shy away from, if they don't bring it up, I'm not bringing it up. I don't think that's the right approach. I think that what we don't talk about is as powerful as what we do talk about. And I think putting that welcome mat out there to say, we're going to talk about everything. There's lots of aspects of your identity that I'd like to get to know better is important. And I think just being authentic and genuine, and if you mess up, you apologize, and you continue the conversation. But you try your best to have this conversation with the individual with good supervision and consultation.
Yes.
Question there?
Yeah. Do I need to?
No, I think I'll repeat it.
Well, for both, but Dr. Fuente, you talked a lot about these principles in treatment clinical setting, which I appreciate. I guess my question is, can you both really talk about how to apply some of these concepts to workplace program development? A lot of it I'm hearing is like cultural competency, so to speak. So how do you sensitize, or how does one sensitize institutions, healthcare systems you talked about, government census bureau? How do we raise some of these concepts in other settings and other institutions, if you can sort of speak to that, if that question makes sense?
So the question is, given, how do we sensitize institutions, employment, healthcare, politics, government? How do we sensitize our social institutions, the court system? How do we socialize our education? I mean, we could go on and on. How do we sensitize those institutions to human diversity? And Dr. Fuentes, would you like to address?
Sure. So I just published a paper with Hector Adames and Dinelia Rosa and Nayeli Chavez on that very issue. And we looked at how to do this in academia, how to make higher ed institutions sensitive to these issues, or more mindful of these issues. And I looked at it from my department's perspective. I really believe that it needs to be salient to the mission statement. What is the mission statement of an institution, and where is the diversity piece in that mission statement? Because mission statements drive strategic plans, mission statements drive goals, institutional goals. And so when you're the only person in the room who's interested in this and committed to this, you've got that mission statement to refer to. And that's what I've always found. Like when in my department, I made sure that in my psychology department, I made sure that diversity was central to our mission. And then whenever I wanted to make sure cultural issues were addressed in coursework, I would say, well, because of our mission, we should probably add, what other components of our department are being aware or being sensitive to this part of our mission. So I really want to push for that it be a part of an institution's mission statement.
I feel like I've spent a portion of my life explaining to people what being Hispanic, Latino, Latina is. My family's from Colombia, so I grew up in the 1960s, and people were constantly coming up to me asking me if I could sell them some cocaine. So there are many stereotypes that, and I'm not, I'm preaching to the choir here, I'm sure, but that we can just break down through education. Unfortunately, that requires each of us to sort of be, a representative for our group all the time, which can be a burden, but, it's a burden that I've taken on gladly. I know no one from my, parents' country that is a proponent of drug use or has ever used drugs or knows a drug dealer. You know, I mean, it's just completely alien to my culture of origin. Yet that's not the view that people have of Colombia. You know, there's a lot more drug use in my view in, you know, I mean, I was born in New York and, you know, I mean, I consider myself to be bicultural. There's so much drug use in the United States of America, you know, and more people die every year from the effects of tobacco, you know, largely American sourced tobacco, than die anywhere in the world from cocaine abuse. Not to minimize cocaine abuse, but there's a skewed view here about who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and sort of just constantly addressing, you know, the stereotypes. And I guess, you know, to the degree that one comes from a culture where you have to do that, just to constantly being willing to do that is a part of it. I mean, it's not always fun, but, you know, there you go.
Are there any other questions? If not, I wanted to have.
Oh, would you like to use this, or would you?
Okay. I just wanted to have everyone, if we could give a rounding applause for our. You know, we have these kind of thoughts in mind about what we'd like to present and how we'd like the session to go. And it always exceeds anything that I would have ever imagined. This was a very well done presentation by both Dr. Ocampo and Dr. Fuentes. And so I really want to thank you. And we wanted to just give a small token of appreciation for coming out here, braving the weather, and being on camera. So you guys were really good sports about all of it, and our hair. And I really appreciated the interactive nature of the presentations, both presentations. And so thank you again. Know that we will be calling on you again at some point. You are now a part of our family. Well, Dr. Fuentes already knew that. And but I also wanted to thank the OWEMA staff because, again, I have these visions of what I'd like it to be, but if it weren't for the staff, this never would have happened. So I really want to pay a special thank you to Neri Ayu, who's kind of the coordinator of this, particularly since I went on maternity leave. She kind of picked up the baton and ran with it. So I want to thank Neri, and also Deontay Williams, who's kind of been her sidekick and supporter, but who will be taking up the baton in a minute. So as Neri is ABD and will be leaving us, sadly, very soon, and Deontay will be taking over in this capacity. So I wanted to thank them both. And of course, our interns, our other interns, Stephanie and Alberto Figueroa Garcia, Dr. Alberto Figueroa Garcia, and Sherry Wynn, who's also in the office of OWEMA. And also wanted to thank Steve, who does our IT and has been able to kind of get us hooked into the Google Hangout and get recordings going. This has been a very nice presentation and session. And so thank you all for coming. We're glad that you were here to share this with us to commemorate Latino Heritage Month. And please enjoy whatever food is remaining. You know, as we say, when if we feed you, you will come. And so we're glad that you all have come. And not only did we feed your stomachs, but I think our presenters fed your minds. And so we really thank you. And we look forward to you coming back and sharing with us during our next Heritage Month, which is in February. Oh, November. Thanks.